You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Reminder about our quest to get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, 1,000 followers on Instagram and Twitter. Want to really up our followership. That way we can continue to grow this Hazard Ground community. And look, guys, this is getting bigger every single week, and we're so thankful that you're part of this. I've had people reach out to me on my own social media and continue to tell me how much they enjoy the podcast and continue to tell me about all the guests that they're hearing, the things that they're learning, and just the stories that are being told. And that really is the most important part of this podcast, is getting those stories out there. You know, I was talking with a former guest on the podcast, James Laporta. You can go back and listen to his episode. Just an incredible story of his, as he was a Marine who became a Newsweek reporter. And, you know, we talked about the fact that this podcast is making history in a sense that, you know, we are telling stories that may never be told again. If you look at Ken Burns' Civil War documentary, right? We only have great stories from there because there were actual letters that people wrote to tell the stories, and those were part of the real tale. And that's why these stories are so important, because maybe not 5 years from now, maybe not 10 years from now, but 20, 30, 40 years from now, when we tell the story of America's wars, including the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq, these are the stories that people will live with forever. And so from that standpoint, we are very, very proud and excited to help make history through the Hazard Ground Podcast. Make sure you go to our website, hazardground.com. Click on the Amazon banner at the bottom of the page or under the sponsors tab and do your normal Amazon shopping. We'll get a percentage of what you guys spend. We donate it right back to some of the great charities you've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground Podcast. So again, thank you guys for being part of this community. Keep the comments coming. Don't forget to leave a rating and a review on iTunes. Doesn't have to be a long one. Give us 5 stars and leave a rating. Let us know what you think. Tell us who you'd like to hear from, and we'll do our best to get them on the show. And keep the comments coming on Facebook. We respond to all of them because we love hearing from you guys. With all that out of the way, let's get on to this week's episode. And joining us this week on the Hazard Ground Podcast is a former Marine sergeant who had 2 deployments to Afghanistan in 2008 and 2010. He left the Marine Corps and became a New York Times reporter. He works on the Washington Bureau and is a Pentagon correspondent. He is Thomas Gibbons Neff, joining us on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Thomas, welcome, brother. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you are the second former Marine who went into journalism. James Laporta, who was on an earlier episode, you know, I joke around with him. So I guess Private Joker and basic military journalism actually became a thing for Marines.
Yeah. What is he? What's that line in Full Metal Jacket's like, 0400s? Like, what are you, Mickey fucking Spillane?
You think you're some sort of fucking writer?
Yeah.
All right, but you actually went to Georgetown University, so you were on a different path. How and why'd you get in the Marine Corps?
Yeah, so I went to Georgetown after.
Oh, okay.
After my time in. So I enlisted at a high school in 06, and I was going to do the reserves, and ended up going to University of Rhode Island for about a semester, and then dropped out and switched my contract to active duty. And then, went to boot camp in January of 07 and got out in 11. And then, applied to a bunch of schools, and through, no clue really how I got into Georgetown, other than, I think my platoon commander at the time was he had just gotten out as like a lacrosse star at Georgetown and helped me set up with the alumni interviews. And my girlfriend at the time's parents, knew a guy who knew a guy, and that was fortunate on my behalf. So went to Georgetown afterward.
So what was the impetus for joining the Marine Corps, though?
That's always a tough one. I mean, 9/11, of course, is always the first thing that comes up. My dad was a Vietnam vet. I was a swift boat guy, and I was like 100 pounds in high school and like 5'2". It's always something to prove, right? Like, how could that not be a part of it?
All right, so you get through boot camp. Was it as tough as you thought it was going to be? Was it what you expected?
Yeah. I mean, boot camp I mean, it was just more of a mind game than anything. I mean, the physical stuff was fine, but just the I don't know, taking like an hour to put on your socks in the morning and just kind of getting beat down. And my dad passed away like a few weeks into boot camp, so I had to go home on emergency leave and then reset. Got dropped all the way to 0. So yeah, boot camp was a little difficult for all sorts of reasons, but yeah.
So to that end, and again, I don't want to pry as far as the passing of your father, but was there more of a resolve, because you said your father was a Vietnam vet, to kind of, finish boot camp and carry this through as part of a way to, honor his memory?
Yeah, I mean, I think boot camp, it didn't really become like, oh, I got to do this for my dad. It was like actually just like a way to grieve, really. I mean, you were just getting, you were worn out from, 4 a.m. to 8 at night, or whenever they did lights. So just, it kind of helped that, right? Like, as far as compartmentalization, if you're just focused on like getting through the day, it's hard to focus on the fact that like you just lost your dad. So it helped a lot. And yeah, I think my drill instructors, they were all drill instructors can be pretty mean people because it's part of the job, but I think they kind of understood that too. So yeah, it helped. If anything.
How quickly after boot camp did you get to your first deployment?
So yeah, let's see. SOI hit the fleet in July 2007. So March 2008 was our first Afghan tour.
Where were you going in Afghanistan? What was your mission? What were you told?
Yeah, so we were on a MEU. We thought we were going to do a med float, and that quickly. We started hearing rumors around Christmas that hey, we might just go straight to Afghanistan, or Afghanistan would be part of the MEU. And then I think we were like, was it dental in February? And they were like, yeah, we're going straight to Afghanistan. All the MEU training kind of went out the window because thank God, spending 10 days on the LPD was brutal. So really glad we didn't have to do that. But yeah, our mission, it was kind of unclear. It was like, it took me a while to figure out, or I had to, get back from that deployment and kind of realize like, oh, why did Marines start going to Afghanistan in 2008? Because we had kind of thought that had been a closed book. And I guess we were one of the first units that were part of George Bush's review of Afghanistan as he was about to, leave office, and had decided that, more troops were necessary, especially in the South. So when we got over there, our mission, we were kind of tasked that we had to secure like a main line of communication, Route Redskins, Route Red, Route Elephant. I think they all had that kind of name. And then we would secure that, and then we would push a convoy. Weapons company would go down and secure Fob Rhino on the Pakistani border, which was Fob Rhino was big in 2001, 2002 when U.S. troops first went into Afghanistan, and then they had pulled back, and I think the ensuing years, and it had been kind of blown over by sandstorms. So for some reason, we were going to reopen Fob Rhino, and it turned out, when we went into Garmser, we were told the 82nd Airborne kind of the red seat, left seat with them because they were doing, air assault operations, and they said, hey, when you get there, Taliban are going to fight for a few days, and then they're going to leave you alone. And that turned out not to be the case. We kind of went into Garmser, and they definitely stuck it out. And so the battalion and then RC South kind of decided to hang out in Garmser for the remainder of the deployment. Quote unquote secure the district, and and then have the Brits come in and relieve us.
Tell me about the day-to-day life there. Like, what was the operational tempo like? How often were you guys seeing contact, stuff like that?
Yeah, so in the first month that we were there, it was pretty much every day. Our platoon, we had kind of felt like, where we were kind of securing this little village, while the rest of the Bravo company, so it's part of our first platoon, Bravo company, but the rest of Bravo company, they were getting in it like every day. And it was pretty linear, right? They were like front lines. There's like, third platoon's there, the Taliban are on the other side of this wadi and this tree line, and they would just kind of go back and forth, and we'd call in artillery and air. But our platoon was kind of, we didn't get shot at until a couple days after we got there. But for about that first month, it was pretty kinetic. I mean, it was kind of like, hey, we're here, they're there, we got to move, we got to take this ground, we're going to take this village, and the Taliban will fall back, and then we'll keep going. And it was kind of like that for a month, until finally they just all withdrew to Pakistan or just bugged out. And then the rest of the deployment was kind of, little to no contact and just repaying villagers and Afghans for the houses that we had blown up with 2,000 pounders. Because one gunny put it, said, you guys just chase shade for the last few months of that deployment, which is pretty true. I mean, just, vehicle checkpoints, patrols, standing posts, sleeping next to burn pits, etc. Meanwhile, up north, we had 2-7 up there and Nowzad, who were just getting hammered for months on end. I mean, they were spread out in an AO the size of Vermont, always calling in air. And we, I think the MEU had kind of retasked much of our, our Harriers and Cobras to go support them. I mean, our deployment, sure, we had our kinetic phase and sure, we all got our combat action or, combat action ribbon, but 2-7 was, I mean, they were losing guys. They were in kind of a totally different version of the war. Mm-hmm. And I just remember being down south, thinking hey, we should get out there and help them out. I think there were, a couple Navy crosses came out of there. I mean, the 2-7 deployment in 2008 is kind of like this weird forgotten time, before the big operations began in 2009 and with Marja and Sangin and 10. But yeah.
Did you guys sustain any casualties on that first deployment?
So we had one killed in action, from a sniper platoon. Coop. I'm looking up his name.
Anybody you knew personally?
On that first deployment, no.
Okay.
No, I didn't know Coop well. I went over to the sniper platoon afterwards. He was kind of a legend. But yeah.
Did that change your mindset at all?
What do you mean? The KIA or?
Yeah, I mean, everybody reacts differently to that sort of thing. I know you said operations were kinetic, but to a certain extent, it for a lot of people, it's a wake-up call. You get to a certain point of day-to-day operations where you almost start to feel invincible or you don't think anything's going to happen because you've had so many successes in a certain area that when it does happen, something does go wrong, it kind of either refocuses you or just kind of wakes you up to the fact that, hey, we're still in the stuff here.
Yeah, when Will Cooper died, or Coop, I remember that day well because we were, it was kind of every company was in some level of contact, and we had cleared a village that night. And we kind of woke up the next morning and heard that, we had lost someone in Alpha Company's AO, and the circumstances were, it was a close-in ambush. The Taliban had lit a bunch of houses on fire to flare out that unit's NVGs and then hit them, and from pretty concealed bunkers. This is like basically a pillbox, half a meter off the ground, if that. And that was kind of you kind of always go into your first deployment thinking, people are going to die. You have these kind of romantic visions of all of that. And then just to kind of hear it as if someone's kind of reading the news, right? Like, hey, someone died. Like, all right, well, it's tough. It's almost, you just kind of know, like, oh, I can't really focus on it. Especially, I didn't know Coop at all. So it was just sucked to hear, but being like, hey, we got our own job to do. I mean, granted, the second deployment was much different, much more personal. But yeah.
Get to that deployment then. I mean, you go back in 2010 it was, right? So that's 2 years later. So obviously you go home, refit, you get your rest cycle, you start training up again, right? Nothing strange or out of the ordinary from that standpoint?
Yeah, no. I mean, 2009, yeah, so 2009, 10, we got back. I changed platoons. and, started the workup. And there's kind of this idea like, oh, hey, 1/6, you guys have done, you did Fallujah, Ramadi, you've done Garmser. You guys are kind of maxed out on combat deployments, so we thought we were going to get kind of a cushy Iraq deployment where we'd go up and like tear down, our OPs or like pack up quad cons or whatever. So after Mojave Viper, I think in July, the Iraq deployment kind of fell off, and 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines took it. So we were kind of in this limbo, waiting for whatever was next in the pipe. And we started to hear rumors of Afghanistan, and the city of Marja came up, but it was kind of this amorphous, where's Marja? What's Marja all about? And then, President Obama was looking at adding more troops to Afghanistan, and eventually he did so in December, and we went in with that 30,000 troop surge. So we were in Leatherneck first week of December, and then the March operation kicked off in earnest mid-February, February 12th, 13th.
Do you know that this deployment is going to be that much different, or did it seem as routine as the first one?
Yeah, it was very right. Like, it's like you have, hey, we've been to Afghanistan before, we've been to Helmand, we know what we're doing. And it was funny, we got off the C-17 at Leatherneck, 2-5 was coming out. We kind of like, it was like right out of a movie, right? We were like passing each other on, they were walking to the C-17 to get on it. We were walking off of it to start the deployment. They had just kind of finished it. We're kind of yelling at each other like, hey, I remember my first time to Afghanistan, kind of crapping on them like we were like old hands. So we kind of thought it'd be kind of like it before, but as soon as it kicked off, one thing we were all worried about, oh man, there's going to be IEDs. The Taliban had barely used IEDs in 2008. Like maybe I can remember 4 over 7 months or whatever, and now they were using them a lot more. But as soon as Marja kicked off, we realized like, well, actually the Taliban here can shoot because they were shooting a lot of, they hit a lot of our guys. So that was kind of the wake up call. Like, hey, this is 2 years later, we've been training, they've been training kind of deal. So, yeah.
All right. So you get to Marja. Once you're there, just paint the picture. I mean, is it dramatically different from just the visual from your first deployment? Does it start off as kinetic as your first deployment?
Yeah. I mean, it starts off, it pretty much, we land kind of in the middle. Everyone's called it like the last Taliban stronghold, right? Like no one's gone in there throughout the course of the war. Now we're sending in 2 battalions supported by, different units on the outskirts. And yeah, it's just getting dropped right into the middle of it. And we start getting shot at pretty much immediately. And that kind of goes for a few weeks and then kind of drops off as the Taliban kind of figure out, who's who in the zoo. And then it comes back around March and even more so in the summer, after the poppy harvest. And, they get the money, they buy the ammo, they buy the weapons. So pretty much nonstop, I guess, unlike Garmser in 08, which was, 1 month of, it was pretty heavy. And then, in 2010, it was pretty much a constant back and forth. And not to mention we were operating under, Stan McChrystal's rules of engagement. So back in 2008, you'd hear like a line of, Savage and Ransom, like the Cobra and Huey mixed section, and you'd be like, all right, I feel good. We start getting shot at, they probably don't even need to be called in. They'll just start shooting back if they can see the guys. And then in 2010, it was air support was pretty much a non-event. Like, hey, maybe we'll get a show of force, maybe after building a target for half a day, they'll drop something. So that was kind of disheartening. And then, looking back now, I think a lot of people brought that up a lot. Hey, remember in 2008 when we had air support, and now it's just kind of a joke.
Could you compare the sort of level of fight to from the first deployment to the second? Were fighters more dug in? Were they more hardened? Were they more accurate or anything like that? Or did it just seem the same at the outset?
No, they definitely seem better trained. I mean, I just feel like whoever was in Marja versus whoever was in Garmser were kind of whether a different unit, different leadership. They seem to have spent those 2 years learning the Marines TTPs and adapting off them. Given in 2008, it was kind of like a stand-up fight, and we called in Artie and Air, and it was a pretty it felt like in 2008 like kind of a clean win, right? Like, oh, they were there, now they're gone, and now everything we can just kind of walk around and shake hands and do whatever. And then in 2010, it was much more, they kind of had our number.
In what sense? Just from the terrain, from the actual numbers of enemy fighters, or were they had an advantage because of what reason?
It's not so much that they had the advantage; they just understood how we operate, right? Like, they could watch a patrol.
Mm-hmm.
That was one thing we kind of learned, is that the Taliban were only going to shoot at us when they kind of understood exactly what they were looking at, right? When they were like, all right, there's a patrol, there's a squad, it's out. It's got to leave this base, it's going to come back to this base. Where, when we start shooting at it, where can we egress? Like, it's just they kind of understood our rhythm, right? I think in 2008, they were just figuring it out. And then by 2010, they at least knew, how we conducted ourselves, what our immediate action might look like. They were very good at hitting a patrol right at the end of their, time outside the wire. So they were kind of tired, and they could pretty much see the HESCOs when they would open up. It was just different, right? It's like, now you look at it, you go fight the Taliban in 2019, 2020. I was talking to a buddy who was, briefing one of the special forces units going over there, and they're like, hey, listen, like these aren't, this is in the Taliban in 2010. Like, these guys know exactly what they're doing. They're going to hit you, and they're going to hit you hard. And, don't think for a second you're fighting the same guys you were a decade ago. So, I mean, those 2 years, I guess it could be the same, right? They learned. Yeah,
I mean, the difference between my two deployments, you could see it was a much different world, but both of mine were in Iraq. So again, the threats were a little bit different from that standpoint. Your friend Brett, when I bring up his name, what sort of goes through your mind, and can you share that story with us?
Talking about Sanders?
Yeah.
You mean when he got blown up? And that we're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, Brett. I was talking to him the other day. We're trying to get this merger reunion together, and I think he'll be coming up. I mean, yeah. I mean, that was kind of a shitty day. I mean, Brett was like, he was like the first dude I met when I got to the fleet, right? Like, I opened the door. Me and the other boot, Hazen, I think, we get there, and he's just like, they had just gotten back from the Ramadi deployment, so he was kind of still had that like, post-deployment glimmer where he's like, I'm gonna get drunk at 3 p.m. even if I'm still on work, and play video games, and get in arguments with his then girlfriend, or just kind of be a goober. And we've been told, when you get to the fleet, you're just gonna, people are gonna throw full beer cans at you and haze the heck out of you. Which, I mean, the hazing definitely happened. But Brett was just like, just a chill dude who like welcomed, some random boots in his barracks room, and my mom was like staying out in town because we had SOI graduation, School of Infantry graduation, and she couldn't get on base. And first thing, Brett did is like, hey, you need a ride to the front? I was like, yeah. So that was that. And then we did the first deployment together, and our platoons were co-located and down in Garmser, and my team got attached to Bravo Company in Margis, so saw a lot of him. And yeah, one day we were just had gotten back and heard this got back from patrol and heard this boom. It sounded pretty close. And next thing you know, like Brett's screaming over the 153, being like hit in the face. Like, and I don't think he was trying to scream. I think he was just, deaf because he had been blown up. So we ran out there, and he's lying in the ditch and kind of blood everywhere, and guys have been hit who don't know they're hit. And my corpsman Wells starts working on him, sets up the scene, and I'm doing what I can. And he has his he's got like this Cool Pix digital camera, and wants like a picture of him, so took a picture of him with that, held onto his iPro, cleaned him up as best we could, and called in the Blackhawks, which got held up because we had Hamid Karzai was in the district center, or in Margis, the city center. But yeah, they eventually landed, and we put him on there. And but now I think he's I think he's going to recruiting duty now. He's still in.
Oh, he's still in. Okay, so he obviously came through fairly unscathed, all things considered.
Yeah. I mean, he kind of. I think he's got like that scar on his face, and I think he like stopped putting like anti-scar cream so he could have it so it looks cool. But I don't know if that's completely factual. But there was also that definite moment where I think he had a piece of steel. He'd have to verify this, but I think it went like right through his testicles, and it was like that moment from Band of Brothers where he had to like tear the pants open and like look to make sure everything was still there. And that definitely happened.
Yeah, I say this often, in the 3+ years we've been telling stories on this podcast, Thomas. One of the funny anecdotes I found out that every guy who gets blown up, the first question they ask is, "My junk okay?" It seems to be that for males, everything else after that is negotiable, right?
Yeah, and it's like you get shot in the shoulder. It's like, hey, is everything still there? Like, yeah, man, you only got shot in the shoulder. But in this case, Brett, there was a lot of blood in his crotch, and we're just like, oh man, you gotta open that up.
So again, guys who get their legs blown off kind of do the same thing. Is my junk okay? So it is a very normal reaction, which again I would have never thought because thankfully I've never been blown up, but it makes a ton of sense. So Brett ends up surviving. What about the guys who didn't? What are those memories like?
Yeah, I mean I guess those are in a different compartment. It just there's Josh DeForges. I was a team leader. He was a fellow team leader. He was like, in Garmser, he was like he came from security forces. He was a sergeant. And like, we had this little fob, or it wasn't a fob, but like an outpost gym that we made from sandbags. And like, he was the first dude who taught me how to actually like squat with like weight on my back. Just miss those guys, I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, your platoon commander Brandon, who passed on, I read that you kind of described him as a good officer, or somebody who cared about you guys. Obviously I don't know if it's a different relationship with your platoon commander than one of your guys, but what are the first memories that pop into mind when you think about him?
Yeah, I mean, Brandon was, he was my platoon commander on my first deployment, and the best memory I have about him. So he passed away in Margis. So by then, I was in a different platoon. He was in charge of the CAF platoon, the anti-armor guys who were picked up in MRAPs. But my first deployment in the workup, I was like, I knew my acronyms. I knew what I could I could screw around with the 119 Fox, and he wanted me to be like the platoon RO, which is not an ideal position for anyone. Like to walk around with the 119 and the platoon commander, and be away from your squad and literally just be like a mobile telephone. Like, yeah, you could know a 9-line, but if I'm sitting next to the platoon commander, I'm not going to be doing anything cool with the radio. It was like a nightmare scenario. I remember we were doing like I think we were like at Mount Town or something, and he was trying to, he had done something with the radio, was having something with a fill, and I fixed it. He was, and like afterwards, he like pulled me aside. This is PFC Gibbons Neff or Lance Corporal Gibbons Neff, 19 years old, and he's like, TM, here's my first name. He's like, do you want to be the platoon radio operator? I was like, sir, absolutely the heck not. Like, I want to go back to my squad more than anything. And he's like, all right, go back to your squad. And I feel like in that moment, there was just, it kind of like dictated what my career in the Marine Corps would be, and or like decided what it would be. And I really appreciated it. And then one of my last memories of him, I was at FOB Marja. It's like a week before he died, and I was there doing like an EDL, just like getting serial numbers for some of the weapons we were sending home. And there was like one sat phone that weapons company had. And we were leaving. I had to, hop a convoy back to our company position. And Brandon, he had the phone and he saw me and he was like, "Hey man, you call. I was just going to call someone, and so I called my girlfriend and we talked for like 20 minutes. And I gave the phone, and Brandon tried. I think he was calling some girl he was seeing, and she didn't pick up. And then I left, and then he died. And I always think, like, I hope he got that call through, I hope somebody picked up. I hope he got it again.
How did you hear about it?
Yeah, I was up at Bravo Company's position. He was down south. I was doing like a run around the LZ, and I had my headphones in, and all of a sudden, Brandon was the platoon commander of a Cat 2, I think, White Horse. That was a call sign. And we had a White Horse section up with us. And all of a sudden I see all these guys like kind of running to, where they have the MRAPs clustered. And they have the, radio watch. And everyone's like standing there staring at the radio. Or like staring at the cab. I don't know if they had like a 117 out, or everyone's in a circle. And I run over there, and they're like, yeah, White Horse 2 or 1, I forget the call sign, but which number, but they got a KIA. And we're just waiting on the ZAP code, right? ZAP is like your initials and the last 4 of your social. And finally the ZAP comes up. It's Bravo, Brandon Barrett, and his 4, and yeah.
When you heard that Bravo in the last 4, I mean, can you describe that emotion? Did you know it immediately, or did you kind of not believe it?
No, I knew it immediately. I think I did. I don't know. I didn't cry. I don't remember crying. It's just something you tell the guys, and like you're in that environment where this stuff's gonna happen. I think you kind of realize then, like, you can't dwell on it. Your brain doesn't even let you dwell on it. I mean, you kind of have the rest of your life to do that. What did I write that day? Here, I have my journal at my desk for whatever reason. Let's see here. 5/5/2010. Brandon Barrett shot and killed Route Elephant. He will be missed. That's it.
Seems very matter of fact.
Yeah, I mean that's where everyone's head was at, right?
Yeah,
You got the rest of your lives to figure out what the hell happened.
Sure.
What it was for.
When you think back on that moment now, how do your emotions differ or they don't?
I mean, at the time, I mean, I guess the only way you could describe your emotions is like immediately cauterized. Like any point, anything beyond that, anything beyond the matter of fact would be detrimental to you, the guys you were in charge of, like what you were supposed to be doing, which was carrying out your mission and not dying. But now, I mean, immense sadness.
Yeah.
I mean, just even recalling to you that last phone call. These are things I don't like to think about because, I mean, that's it. Or going back into the company office after you come back for deployment, and there's his desk, and he's just, it's just empty.
You get back from the deployment and you have the time to start processing this stuff. Was there a moment that it all hit you and it came out from an emotional standpoint?
Not that I can remember. I just knew there was a moment where we were all I knew we were all kind of in trouble, because you're back before you go on leave and you're back at the barracks and you're back in the U.S., but at the same time, you also feel like, you're still with all the guys. They're like a couple doors away. And, I was just sitting in my barracks room and I could hear a friend of mine just screaming at his girlfriend through the cinder block barracks walls. It was like the middle of the day. And it was just like I never heard it before, right? We'd been living all in the same place before, and it just like all of a sudden you kind of realize like maybe we're all not okay. Maybe there might be something wrong with us. I don't know why that triggered me to think that, or maybe it's just like what he was yelling about, or just, I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's funny because my last deployment was in 2011. I think that more now than I ever did, years ago. I sometimes I feel like there are still things that are residual that I haven't even bothered to dig up. That for, reasons in life, I got married, I had kids and everything else, that some things are start to manifest themselves in weird ways that I ask that question now more than I ever did before. Maybe I'm not okay. I don't know.
It's funny. I was talking to a friend of mine who's going on his 10th deployment. He left in the last couple of days. And he was at one point, my squad leader in 08. And, he's very aware, right? He's like, I feel like he's been in this pattern so much, right? Of deployments, getting ready for deployments, of training. Like, I did 4 years, I got out. Not a long time when it comes to other people and how much stuff they've done in the military. And right, like once I got out in 2011, I've had until today to kind of unpack those 4 years, right, and try and understand why I did this or why the country did that, or like, what's Afghanistan all about? Like I've had this time. He's had none of that time. And he's starting to understand that, like, I've been doing this for so long, so often, that things are starting to come through the cracks. Like that, that maybe he's having bad dreams or that he's tired because, like, you can't, you're just going at 1,000,000 miles an hour for almost 2 decades. Like, eventually your brain just has to do it. Unlike, you and me, we can go look back at 2010 and 2011 and 2008 and be like, well, why do we feel that way? Why do you feel this way now than you did then? When he's kind of operating like he's always in the then, right? Not the now. I don't know.
I don't want to fast forward too much, but, just obviously we talked before. You went to Georgetown after you got out. You started doing the writing thing. When you write, and now that you're a Pentagon correspondent and covering, the wars from the other side, when you write, how much of sort of the emotions of those moments do you try to put in your writing, or do you keep them out for the sake of objectivity?
I think it just depends what I'm writing about. I mean, I guess it's like kind of how I, approach reporting, and like what does my short 4 years in the service do to how I view the military now. And I mean, right, it's kind of the way I see it is there was a moment in my life where I was like at the scene of the crime, right? Like I watched it happen. At the front, the tippy top of the United States foreign policy aims, or, adventurism or wars, whatever you want to call it. There I was, I watched it. And now here I am all these years later, kind of on the back end where I can watch, the Pentagon, the White House, military officials try and put that shell around it in the form of press releases or information that don't even really touch the reality, right? Of what's going on in Syria. Like, well, what's, Specialist Belt Buckle doing in Deir ez-Zor, Syria right now? I don't know. You don't know. I mean, I'll tell you they're counter ISIS mission. I'm just saying, like, at the core of all of those press releases, of all of those statements, I kind of have an idea maybe of what it looks like, or like maybe that's right and that, or that's wrong, just because I have some instinctual feeling based off of what I did before. Yeah, it's like at the end of the day, I got out as a corporal, picked up sergeant in the IRR. Like, I know next to nothing. I can give you what the salute acronym stands for. What happened in Afghanistan in 2008 and 2010 is at the tactical level, but it doesn't give me doesn't at all give me the feeling like, oh, I've got it all figured out. I guess I can just have a better bullshit detector than maybe some other people.
Well, and to that end, full disclosure for the listeners, I actually found Thomas on something he wrote on Twitter. I reached out to you because I thought you had a very honest and refreshing opinion, even though there were some things counter to it, because like now I see the wars in the world in a different manner, because you walk away from it, you have a better understanding of how and why things happen. To that end, though, I would tell you that our coverage of this stuff in general is very streamlined. Like, knowing what I know now, would I go back and do things differently? Or if I had, the ability to dictate some sort of foreign policy, would I think we should have made some different decisions? Maybe. But I can say with 100% confidence, in the moments that I was in combat, in the moments where those decisions had to be made, I don't think we made too many wrong decisions. Sure, there are tactical things that went wrong, and there are battles that we may have, quote, lost, if you want to put a W or an L on it. But in general, I think it's dangerous to try and extrapolate all these years later a given battle, a given decision, a given time frame as right or wrong, because given the information we had at the time, we were doing the best with what we had. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I don't know, but I mean, at the same time, it kind of right, like, all right, let's look at Marja. What was Marja about? What were the Marines doing in Helmand Province? Why were the Marines in Helmand Province? The Marines wanted their Anbar in Afghanistan, right? And they got it. Why did Larry Nicholson want to go into Marja? Well, it was the last Taliban stronghold. Like, how could you have taken it over? You talked to the ODAs. They said, hey, that was a mission for 2 ODAs. For yeah, we were operating on at the what we knew at the time, but the point is, like, that didn't turn out well. Yet people continued to climb up the ladder, and we kind of just bought it kind of hook, line, and sinker that, like, hey, we did what we could. It's still not going well, but, we're not being reflective enough or looking back enough to understand that, like, maybe the whole concept of what we're doing is flawed from the get-go. I don't know. I mean, I think, like, you kind of need to be able to look back and be like, yeah, that was wrong.
That's fair. I guess my question to you is, knowing what you know now, and given how you cover this, is there any sort of anger, and anger is not the right word, sort of just like frustration about the way certain things went down because you lost friends, because the cost was high, that you sit there and you use that hindsight 2020 to say, we should have done X or should have done Y kind of deal? Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you look at, like, most American foreign policy decisions, like, emotion plays into it on some level, right? I mean, like, and looking back and, like, looking at how Marja turned out, like, you ask someone, an expert, like, yeah, the Marines did everything they should have done in Marja, in Helmand Province, and they did a good job at it. It was the policy that failed them, right? It was this idea that we're going to draw down in 2011, 2013, that, like, what our gains were going to be, thrown away eventually. Like, well, if that was the case, right? If that was the policy, then, why didn't the strategy reflect the policy? I mean, I'm just saying, like, yeah, of course. I mean, like, my friends, Brandon, Josh, Matt, who was wounded and passed away after he came back, like, how can you not look back and kind of see, you trust the institution, right? You're like, all right, I'm going into Marja. I'm going to take down Marja because.
Well, what choice do you have, right? I mean,
right,
not trusting them means
exactly.
you leave and you go AWOL. I mean, that's, there's not a lot of options.
Of course. Yeah, there's not a lot of options. You believe in the machine, right? Like, this is what you signed up for. This is, these are the books that you read. This is the idea that you've bought into. And then only to kind of get out and years go by and then kind of look at, everyone's agenda, everyone, whether it's, the generals, the politicians, they all have different aims, right? Like, they all have different ideas of how they're fighting the war, and you just got caught up in one of them. Like, there's just, it's disorienting, and it's frustrating. Like, it's just like, that's just how it went. That's how it always goes in these things, right? But to just not know it then and kind of be there and then, and just.
Let me ask you this. Go back and talk to Thomas right after his deployments, and then go back and talk to Thomas right as he starts covering, the wars for the New York Times. What would you say to each one of those younger versions of yourself as far as a piece of advice about how to handle, where you are at that stage of your life?
Huh. So I'm talking to myself right after I got back or right before
Right after you get back, what would you, take it one at a time, right after you get back, what would you say to yourself, knowing what you know now, what would you say to yourself about how to handle everything that you just went through?
I mean, I guess I would say to myself after I just got back, like, hey, don't discount the feelings that you have now. Like, don't think that they're, not a big deal, I guess. Like, they're, whatever you have in your head is, and trying to write it off as being like, well, this happened, that happened, but I'm fine. Just know that that's going to be there forever, and you're never going to have an answer. And that's okay.
Then go to right before you take on this job at the New York Times, where you're, going to be covering this war, these wars, and every aspect of foreign policy. Knowing what you know now, again, what you've learned about both inside and outside influences, what do you say to yourself about how you start doing this job?
I would say, don't forget the guy on the ground. And realize the people who were in charge of you, who made these decisions, to send people here, there, direct, whatever, the American military strategy, just realize they don't know much more than you do.
It's funny because it's true to a certain extent, right? I mean, they have certain levels of information you don't have access to, but the idea of being able to make that decision, in a cogent manner doesn't always add up, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's just this idea of trust. And it's just, I guess that's what's degraded, from 2008 to now significantly.
I'll ask one final question this way. Are we I don't want to say we were a better or worse force. How much of a different military are we now? And what are the consequences of that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I kind of feel like, what we are now as a military is that you have a lot of senior leaders who grew up in Afghanistan and Iraq, and very much, like I said, emotion plays so much, I think, in our foreign policy and strategic decisions, that, the world is kind of viewed through the GWAT eyes. And I think there are people who want to look forward and want to think about, great power competition, whatever the hell that means, by the way. I have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to figure it out. It's like, on the agenda. But, who want to look forward, but there's no way you can look forward. There's no way, your leadership can divorce their attachment to these wars that we're still very much fighting in some way, and also look to the future. I just don't think we have the United States military has the ability to do that. I think it wants to, see like little stuff, like, hey, we need to get better at electronic warfare or cyber, or, I don't even know what the future looks like, and then it's like this mine policy that came out. Like, well, whatever the future looks like, we need more landmines for whatever reason. Like, it's just this, I don't know. It kind of feels like we're in two places at once. And I think for any military, for any human being or anybody, it's just not really conducive to success. But that's just me. No, and that's me, as the Lance Corporal who was told, hey, stay in your lane. That's kind of like outside my lane. But that's just kind of, my general feeling, I guess.
Well, no, listen, I'm one of those senior guys, right? Like, I mean, people who listen to the podcast know, I'm a colonel still in the Guard, but I'm a little bit counterculture in that aspect. I mean, I remember when I was there for the closeout of Iraq in 2011, and you had 1- and 2-star generals and 06s all over the place with their claws in the rug trying to fight to stay. President Obama saying, we're leaving, and there are legitimately people looking for reasons to try and stay, because they grew up in this environment, and I think it's a very lucid point that this whole generation of leadership now running this thing, and honestly, I think we need to turn the garden over quicker. Get out some of the guys in their 50s and 60s and move into the guys in their 30s and 40s to start to make these decisions, because I think we're better equipped to say enough is enough. Like, we need to start changing the focus of where we are and how we do business and move in a different direction and not be scared of that direction because it's not combat oriented, right? Because I think there is that whole sort of ideology that if we're not in combat, we're not doing what we're supposed to do. And that's not true.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, just as you said, to quote you, just one guy's opinion, right?
Yeah. Just trying to stay in my lane and not get fired.
Exactly.
That's pretty much my approach.
Well, Thomas, listen, I appreciate you sharing your story. I appreciate your honesty, and I appreciate certainly your candor. I love your work, bro, and I don't say that suck up. I mean, I'm a fan. I think you bring a whole different level of reporting and accuracy and honesty and fairness to a very spirited sort of debate, but also not a lot of people have the experience to know what they're talking about, and you do. And so I certainly thank you for the work that you do as far as reporting on this thing in this, quote, fake news sort of world. Yours is not. It is as close and as accurate to honest and fairness as we can get. So I certainly thank you for that as well.
No, thanks for having me.
All right, Thomas Gibbons Neff, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground, brother.
All right, take care.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.